An elderly farmer named John Walton Sr. walks his own mountain land on an ordinary morning. He discovers that a lumber company has sent surveyors onto ground his family has worked and lived on since 1789. Grandpa Zeb Walton pulls a survey stake from the earth with his bare hands. No piece of paper in a stranger's pocket will tell him where his land ends and another man's begins. The surveyor explains without embarrassment that Packard Lumber filed for timber rights more than a year ago. The Waltons never came into town to register a legal deed on land they had always simply known as their own. Grandpa walks away from the surveyor in silence, and when John Boy catches up and asks directly whether a deed even exists, Grandpa does not answer. Instead, he begins naming the things his ancestors built and planted and cleared across that mountain as though memory were the same thing as title. John Boy stands alone on the path after Grandpa walks ahead, and the weight of what has just gone unanswered settles over him. A family that has lived on land for more than 140 years has apparently never proved in any court's language that the land is theirs. John Walton Sr. and Grandpa Zeb sit in the office of a lawyer named Wilson Guffey. Grandpa spreads out the family Bible with entries running down through the generations, along with a collection of old wills, and asks whether any of it means something in a court of law. The lawyer listens and then explains that the Land Act of 1850 required settlers to file formal deeds. The Waltons never did, which means the claim they have lived inside for generations has no standing that a judge is bound to honor. John Sr. sits forward in his chair when the lawyer names the cost of fighting the case in court. The bond required before a single word of argument can be heard is $200. The expression on his face is not anger, but something closer to exhaustion, because $200 in the middle of the Depression is not a sum a working farm family can simply produce. Grandpa looks at his son after the lawyer suggests that selling the land would solve the money problem. John Sr. answers with 5 words. That is not for selling. The flatness in his voice makes clear that this is not stubbornness, but the only position a man in his place can occupy with any self-respect. That evening, the whole family gathers in the living room, and John Sr. reads through every delivery of lumber and every cord of firewood sold. The total comes to $46.75 against a debt of $153.25. The gap between those two numbers sits in the room like a presence no one can move around. His daughter Mary Ellen comes downstairs holding a silver teapot she found buried in a plowed field, offering it as her contribution. John Sr. thanks her and sends it back with her, unwilling to take what belongs to his children, even when what belongs to him is not enough. After the children have gone to bed, John Sr. sits at the kitchen table with his wife, Olivia Walton. He says quietly that all these years of work have not left him able to raise $200. The shame in that admission is the particular shame of a man who has never stopped working and still finds himself unable to protect what is his. John Sr. tells Olivia that he has already instructed the lawyer to begin the court action. Once Packard Lumber strips the timber, the watershed will be gone, and the topsoil will follow the summer rains. The mountain that has fed his family for generations will become something like the Dust Bowls out west, and that is a future he cannot allow himself to stand by and watch arrive. He stands at the kitchen counter and tells Olivia that he is scared. She does not reassure him with anything false, but only places her hand near his and stays there. There is nothing either of them can honestly say to make what is coming smaller than it is. The next morning Olivia reads a note John Boy left before dawn, and her face carries the grief of a mother watching her 17-year-old son walk toward a city he does not know. The pressure of the family's debt has pushed him to do exactly what his father had decided he must not do. John Sr. sits at the head of the breakfast table and says he could use the extra money, then stops himself. The sentence itself reveals how completely the threat to the land has stripped away his ability to simply be a father who keeps his son home and safe. John Boy arrives at his boarding house in the city, introducing himself to the other residents with the same easy courtesy he learned at home on Walton's mountain. He sits down in the unfamiliar room and takes a moment to look around at walls that belong to no one. The stillness around him makes clear that everything familiar is now 6 miles and a world away. That night he writes a letter home to his sister, Mary Ellen, describing a city where people sleep in adjoining rooms and each is locked in his own life and seems lonely. The words tell the family more about how he is feeling than about where he is. He speaks his own name aloud in the empty room. John Boy Walton, machine shop apprentice. He says it as though the sound of it will confirm that he is still the same person who left Walton's mountain. Back on the mountain, the sawmill work continues, with John Sr. and his sons pushing worn equipment past the point it was built to endure. The deadline for the court bond will not move regardless of what the machinery does. That evening, Olivia sets oatmeal and potato pancakes on the table where a proper supper should be. When one of the children asks for meat or eggs, she tells them plainly that the eggs have been sold because every penny is already spoken for. John Boy tells his new friend Monty that he has $18 in his pocket and that 10 of it must go home to the family the moment the post office opens. $4 goes to board, leaving almost nothing to live on for a week. He says all of this without complaint, as a man reporting a fact. Then 2 men rob him in an alley and take everything he has, including the money meant for his family. He sits bruised at a police station desk explaining that his folks need that money. The officer looks at him with the practiced patience of someone who has heard it many times before. A few days later, John Sr. reads John Boy's letter aloud to the family gathered around him. When he reaches the line asking for $5 to be sent back, his face shows the particular pain of a father whose son went to the city to rescue the family and is now asking the family to rescue him. On the mountain, the motor on the saw gives out, and John Sr. stands over it, telling Olivia he needs his son there to help, not inside eating. Every hour of lost work is an hour they cannot recover against a deadline already decided by a court in Charlottesville. He tells his son quietly that it is going to take a miracle to meet the deadline. The word miracle in a man's mouth means he has already measured the distance between what he has and what he needs and found it too wide for ordinary effort to cross. Mary Ellen walks out to meet the postman on his route and offers him the pewter piece she found in the field, asking him to take it to a dealer in Charlottesville. The fact that a child is now selling family antiques to close the gap makes plain how far the crisis has reached into every corner of the household. The family counts what they have gathered, and the total comes to $140, leaving $60 still short. The word short lands the way it always does in this story, as a number that will not move no matter how hard anyone has worked. Then John Boy walks through the door, thinner and marked by the city, and before a proper greeting can be exchanged, his father asks how much was still needed. John Boy places $50 on the table, the reward paid for helping catch the men who had robbed him. The family's silence in that moment holds everything that has been at stake. Vernon Rutley emerges from the Jefferson County offices waving the legal grant certificate, the paper that confirms the land is safe. It is a small rectangle of official stationery that looks like nothing at all after the months of cutting and hauling and counting and going without that were required to produce it. John Boy writes in his journal that he has lived in a city, known adventure, found friends, and even been kissed by a pretty girl, but that it was good to be home again, to know that special love, and to hear those special voices. The simplicity of that sentence is the most precise account of what the whole ordeal has been about. Not the debt, not the deadline, not the $200, but the place and the people those things threatened to take from an elderly farmer named John Walton Sr., and from every person who called that mountain